Welcome to Sherlock's Casebook, where every mystery has a story, and every story hides a secret. Step into the world of deduction, suspense, and untold cases of Sherlock Holmes. Are you ready to uncover the truth? The Perplexing Letter. It was a dreary autumn afternoon when I found Sherlock Holmes seated in his usual chair at 221B Baker Street, his sharp eyes scanning the latest edition of the Times with a look of studied indifference. The rain drummed steadily against the window panes, and the gas lamps outside flickered against the growing London mist. I had just returned from a rather uneventful visit to my medical practice when I noticed a single sheet of paper resting upon the table before him, its crisp edges and immaculate penmanship suggesting recent delivery. Holmes did not look up as I entered, but his voice, cool and deliberate, greeted me. "You have had a tiresome afternoon, Watson. Your boots betray a lengthy walk through the muddy streets of Kensington, and the slight stain on your left cuff suggests an ink mishap, perhaps a rather hasty prescription." I smiled at his familiar deductions, though I had long ceased to be surprised by them. "Your skills remain as sharp as ever, Holmes. But I must admit, I am more intrigued by that letter before you. From the look of it, I would wager it is no ordinary correspondence." Holmes allowed himself the faintest hint of a smile before tapping the letter lightly with his index finger. "Your instincts serve you well, my dear Watson. This letter is, in fact, a singular anomaly, and one that may prove most diverting." I took a seat opposite him, eager to learn more. Holmes lifted the paper and read aloud. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, though the world believes me dead, I assure you my influence lingers yet. Before the game is truly over, I have left behind a final move, one you may not so easily counter. My legacy is written in ink, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the one with eyes keen enough to read between the lines. Follow the trail, if you dare. But be warned, Holmes, even in death, I am not without my reach. Ichi M." I started upright in my chair. "Moriarty," I whispered in disbelief. Holmes's expression remained unreadable. "An amusing proposition, is it not, considering that Professor James Moriarty met his end at the Reichenbach Falls some years ago? But this must be some forgery, a hoax. Surely, Holmes, he could not have—" Holmes raised a hand to silence me. "The handwriting, Watson, is unmistakable. It is Moriarty's." A chill ran through me as I studied the letter again. "But if that's true, then we may have before us the last game of Professor Moriarty," Holmes finished. "A game that, I suspect, may test even my faculties to their utmost." At that moment there was a sharp knock upon the door. Mrs. Hudson entered, her expression flustered. "A gentleman is here to see you, Mr. Holmes. Says it's urgent." Holmes glanced at me before setting down the letter. "Send him in." As the door opened, a pale, trembling man stepped inside. His face was gaunt, his clothes rain-soaked and dishevelled. His eyes darted about the room in frantic desperation. "Mr. Holmes," he gasped, "you must help me. The Professor's revenge, it has already begun." The terrified visitor. The man stood before us, his breath ragged and his hands trembling, as though gripped by some unseen terror. He was of middling height, his thinning blonde hair plastered to his forehead by the dampness of the London air. His suit, though finely tailored, was dishevelled, and his gloves bore smudges of ink. Holmes regarded him with sharp curiosity, his steely gaze drinking in every detail. compose yourself, sir," Holmes said coolly, "and do have a seat before. Your nerves betray you entirely. Watson, if you would be so kind as to pour our guest a brandy." I obliged, pouring a small measure into a glass and handing it to the man, who clutched it gratefully. He took a single hurried sip before setting it down, his fingers still visibly shaking. Holmes leaned forward slightly. "Now then, you spoke of revenge, Moriarty's, I presume?" The man swallowed hard and nodded. Yes, Mr. Holmes, you must. Understand, I came as soon as I received it. I do not know who else to turn to." "Received what, precisely?" The man fumbled inside his coat pocket and withdrew a folded sheet of paper, his hands barely steady enough to pass it across the table. Holmes accepted it with a gloved hand, unfolded it, and examined the contents. I leaned in beside him. The message was brief, written in the same distinct hand as the letter we had received earlier. "The debt has yet to be settled. He knew too much, and now so do you. The past cannot be buried, nor can the sins of those who trespass against the unseen hand. Expect no mercy." There was no signature, only a single inked symbol at the bottom of the page, a letter M, identical to the one in Holmes's letter. Holmes exhaled slowly through his nose. "Your name, sir?" "Henry Wetherell," the man stammered. Was a solicitor for a number of notable clients, one of whom was... He hesitated, his throat tightening. Holmes nodded. "Professor Moriarty." Wetherell flinched at the name as though struck. Yes, in the years before his death, I handled some of his private affairs. Nothing unlawful, I swear it, but I knew enough to be useful." Holmes steepled his fingers. "And dangerous, it would seem." The solicitor shuddered. "I never spoke of what I knew. I never even hinted at it. But in the past fortnight, strange things have begun happening. I have been followed, my home ransacked, and 2 nights ago—" He lowered his voice, his face drained of all colour. "2 nights ago, I heard someone whispering outside my window. A voice, I swear to you, Mr. Holmes, was his." I exchanged a glance with Holmes, half expecting him to dismiss the notion as hysteria. But he merely regarded Wetherell with intense scrutiny, as if weighing the measure of the man before him. "Now this letter," Holmes murmured, tapping the page lightly with his index finger. "A curious thing indeed." "You believe me, then?" Wetherell asked desperately. Holmes did not answer immediately. He leaned back in his chair, the ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "Tell me, Mr. Wetherell, before you received this letter, had you confided in anyone? Shared your concerns, perhaps, with a trusted colleague or friend?" Wetherell hesitated. "No one, save for my assistant, Miss Lillian Harrow. She's been with me for years, and I trust her implicitly." Holmes nodded. "And you are certain she has no connection to Moriarty's past dealings?" "Certain," Wetherell said. "She knew of my work with him, but nothing more. She only urged me to seek your help." Holmes glanced at me before rising to his feet. "Then I believe it is time we pay Miss Harrow a visit. Watson, fetch your coat. I suspect the night may yield more answers than the day." Wetherell's eyes widened. You think she is in danger?" Holmes's expression darkened ever so slightly. "I think, Mr. Wetherell, that we are already several moves behind in a game whose board was set long before we took notice. And with that, we stepped out into the fog-laden streets of London, the spectre of Moriarty looming ever closer. A visit to Miss Harrow. The rain had slowed to a misty drizzle, as Holmes, Wetherell and I made our way through the dimly lit streets of London. The gas lamps flickered like distant stars in the fog, their glow barely penetrating the heavy shroud of the night. Wetherell had given us the address of his assistant, Miss Lillian Harrow, and Holmes had wasted no time in hailing a hansom cab to take us there. Holmes sat in deep contemplation, his fingers pressed together beneath his chin. Wetherell, on the other hand, fidgeted beside me, his nerves frayed by the growing sense of dread. I could not blame him. The idea that Moriarty, the Napoleon of crime, had left behind a final game to be played even after his demise was unsettling. After a silent ride through the cobbled streets, the cab finally came to a halt in front of a modest townhouse nestled between larger residences in Bloomsbury. A single gas lamp outside the entrance illuminated the front steps, casting long, eerie shadows. Holmes disembarked first, his eyes scanning the surroundings with the practised ease of a predator sensing unseen dangers. I followed, assisting Wetherell, who stumbled slightly as he stepped down. The man was visibly shaken, and I feared that his paranoia might soon give way to hysteria. Holmes rapped sharply upon the door. We waited in silence, the night carrying only the distant sound of carriage wheels on wet stone. After a moment, the door creaked open. A young woman, no older than 30, stood before us. She was slender, with dark auburn hair neatly pinned at the nape of her neck. Her hazel eyes were sharp and intelligent, though they betrayed a flicker of apprehension upon seeing us. "Miss Harrow?" Holmes inquired. She hesitated before nodding. "Yes, and you must be Mr. Holmes." Her voice was steady, but there was a guardedness about her. Her gaze shifted to Wetherell. "Mr. Wetherell, is something wrong?" It's the letter," Wetherell stammered. "I told you about it, and now Mr. Holmes believes you may be in danger." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I see. Perhaps you should come in." She stepped aside, allowing us entry. The house was modest but well kept. Miss Harrow gave a small nod, her expression grim. She moved toward the door, securing it with a firm click as Holmes, Wetherell and I stepped out into the night. The chill of the London mist clung to my skin as we emerged onto the narrow street. The gas lamps cast an eerie glow, illuminating the cobbled path, but beyond their reach, the darkness yawned like an open abyss. Holmes moved swiftly, his long coat billowing slightly as he led the way. There is only one route a man on foot could take without doubling back into our sights, he murmured, his sharp gaze sweeping the fog-bound street. If we are swift, we may still catch him before he vanishes entirely. Wetherell lagged slightly, behind, his breath uneven, but Holmes paid him no mind. We turned the corner, emerging onto a wider avenue. The street was empty, save for the occasional flicker of a carriage lantern in the distance. The only sound was the steady tap of our boots against the wet stone. Then Holmes stopped abruptly. He crouched, running his fingers lightly over the pavement. When he stood again, his expression was unreadable. "Fresh footprints," he murmured. Whoever he was, he moved quickly. but not quickly enough to avoid leaving a trace. I peered down and saw them, faint impressions in the dampness of the street, leading toward a narrow alleyway. Wasted no time. With a nod to me, he advanced, his movements silent and precise. As we stepped into the alley, the air grew heavier. The towering brick walls on either side seemed to close in, the fog thickening around us like an oppressive shroud. Holmes paused, listening. I followed his gaze upward. Several windows lined the buildings on either side, their glass dark and vacant. Then, from somewhere in the shadows ahead, a sound, a faint scuff of a shoe against stone. Holmes moved like lightning. He darted forward, and I followed close behind. The alley opened into a small courtyard, enclosed on all sides by buildings. A single door stood at the far end, slightly ajar. Holmes gestured for silence, then pressed himself against the wall, peering through the gap. I could hear Wetherell's, breathing, shallow and anxious, behind me. Holmes turned to us, his voice barely above a whisper. "Whoever entered here did so recently. Watson, ready yourself." I tightened my grip on my revolver as Holmes pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air within was thick with the scent of damp wood and aged paper. The room itself was dimly lit by a flickering oil lamp that sat upon an old desk. Shelves lined the walls, stacked haphazardly with books and papers. But the room was empty. Holmes moved with calculated precision, his fingers skimming over the desk's surface. A single sheet of paper lay in the centre, its edges curling slightly from the heat of the lamp. He lifted it carefully, his eyes scanning the words. I stepped forward, peering over his shoulder. The note was written in the same elegant hand as the previous messages. "Holmes, you are as predictable as ever, but you are still 2 steps behind. The pieces are already in motion, and soon the board will be cleared. Keep chasing shadows if you wish, but do not expect to catch them. M." Holmes exhaled slowly. He lowered the paper, his expression unreadable. Then, without warning, he spun on his heel and strode toward the door. "Watson!" he called over his shoulder. "Bring Wetherell. We are leaving." I hesitated. "But Holmes, surely there must be something—" "Not here," he cut in. "This was left for us to find, nothing more. The true game is being played elsewhere." Wetherell looked at him in alarm. "Then what do we do?" Holmes stepped out into the alley once more, his voice carrying the faintest edge of amusement. "We let Moriarty's ghost lead us to where he wants us to go." And with that, we disappeared once more into the fog-laden streets of London, the hunt far from over. The man in the carriage. We left the abandoned room behind, stepping once more into the damp embrace of the London night. The fog was denser now, curling around the gas lamps and muffling the sounds of distant carriages rattling along the cobblestone streets. Holmes moved with purpose, his keen gaze darting about as though calculating a route invisible to the rest of us. Wetherell, still visibly shaken, struggled to keep pace. "Holmes, what does this mean? Another letter, another warning. But from whom? Moriarty is dead." Holmes did not break stride. "Indeed he is, Mr. Wetherell, but power such as his does not simply vanish. His web of influence was vast, his associates loyal. It stands to reason that someone seeks to continue his work, or at the very least, ensure that whatever secrets he left behind remain buried. We reached the main road, where a single hansom cab stood idling beneath the dim glow of a street lamp. The driver was hunched forward, obscured beneath a thick coat and hat, his features lost in shadow. He made no move to acknowledge us. Holmes slowed his pace, his hand slipping subtly toward the revolver hidden beneath his coat. I did the same, instinctively tightening my grip. There was something unnatural about the cab's presence, almost as if it were waiting for us. Holmes turned to me, his voice barely above a whisper. "Watson, does anything strike you as odd about this carriage?" I hesitated. The hansom itself appeared ordinary, yet something nagged at my senses. Then it struck me. The horse, it's barely steaming, I murmured, as if it hasn't travelled far. "Or at all," Holmes replied. His sharp eyes flickered toward the driver. "Stay behind me." He stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "You there? I presume you are waiting for a passenger." The driver remained still. Then, with a slow and deliberate motion, he lifted his head. Even in the dim light, I could see the scar that ran from his temple to his cheek, a deep groove of old injury. His lips curled into a humorless smile. "Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice rough and weathered, "Rehen and sure. You are expected." Holmes's expression remained unreadable. "Is that so? And who, pray, has extended such an invitation?" The driver gestured towards the carriage door. "Step inside, and you will see." Wetherell let out a quiet gasp, but Holmes merely tilted his head, considering. "An intriguing proposition," he mused. "And if I refuse?" The driver chuckled. "Then you shall never know the answer you seek." For a long moment there was silence. The fog swirled thickly around us, the dim light of the street lamp flickering like a dying star. Then, to my astonishment, Holmes took a step forward. "Very well," he said. "Watson, remain here with Wetherell. If I do not return within 15 minutes, you know what to do." "Holmes, this is madness," I protested. But he held up a hand, silencing me. "I assure you, Watson, I have no intention of meeting an untimely end. But certain risks must be taken if we are to outmaneuver our adversary." With that, he climbed into the carriage. The driver shut the door behind him with an air of finality. Then, with a flick of the reins, the horse lurched forward, vanishing into the mist. I stood motionless. My pulse quickened. Wetherell turned. To me his voice a frantic whisper. "Dr. Watson, what now?" I exhaled slowly, gripping my revolver tighter. "Now, Mr. Wetherell," I said grimly, "we wait. A game of shadows." As the carriage carrying Holmes disappeared into the thick London fog, I felt a deep unease settle over me. The rational part of my mind knew that Holmes had faced danger many times before, and had always emerged unscathed, yet something about this encounter felt different, more calculated, more personal. Wetherell shifted nervously beside me. "Dr. Watson," he whispered, his voice trembling, "should we not follow?" I exhaled sharply, gripping my revolver with white-knuckled intensity. "And how do you propose we do that, Mr. Wetherell?" I gestured at the empty street. That carriage could be anywhere by now, lost in this cursed fog. Holmes gave us instructions, and we shall abide by them. We wait. If he does not return within 15 minutes, we take action." We stood in tense silence, beneath the dim glow of the gas lamp. The street was quiet, save for the distant echo of hooves against cobblestone. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, every minute dragging on with unbearable slowness. Then, at last, the sound of approaching wheels cut through the mist. A carriage emerged from the fog, not the one that had taken Holmes, but another, rattling toward us at a brisk pace. The driver, a wiry man with sharp eyes, pulled up alongside us and tipped his hat. "You Dr. Watson?" he asked in a thick Cockney accent. I tensed. "Who wants to know?" The driver smirked. "Mr. Holmes sends his regards. Said you'd be wanting a ride." Relief and suspicion warred within me. "Holmes is safe." "Safe as can be, sir. But he said to bring you quick-like." I hesitated only a moment before pulling open the carriage door. "Come, Wetherell, we're going." The man scrambled in behind me, and as soon as the door shut, the driver flicked the reins, sending us lurching forward into the fog. Holmes' perspective. The interior of the first carriage was dimly lit by a single lantern affixed to the side. Holmes sat with his fingers steepled beneath his chin, his gaze fixed on the shadowed figure across from him. The man was draped in a long dark coat, his face partially obscured by the low brim of his hat. Though the light was poor, Holmes could make out a pair of sharp, intelligent eyes watching him with quiet amusement. "You are remarkably bold, sir," Holmes said at last, "to summon me in such dramatic fashion, one might almost say theatrical." The man chuckled, his voice smooth and confident. "And you, Mr. Holmes, are remarkably trusting. Most would hesitate before stepping into an unknown carriage." Holmes smiled faintly. "Trust, my dear sir, has nothing to do with it. I simply calculated that the risk was acceptable, provided certain precautions were taken." The man leaned forward slightly. "And what precautions would those be?" Holmes met his gaze evenly. "Shh! Shh! For one, I observed that your driver, despite his imposing scar, bore the calluses of a violinist rather than a knife-wielding thug, suggesting a background in the arts rather than murder. Secondly, I noted that you did not immediately issue threats or demands, implying that your intentions were more complex than simple violence. And lastly," he gestured toward the man's hands, gloved but precise in their movements, "you are a scholar, not an assassin, which leads me to wonder, who are you, and why have you gone to such lengths to secure my attention?" The man chuckled again, the sound rich with amusement. "Your reputation is well earned, Mr. Holmes." He removed his hat, revealing a lean, angular face with a sharp jawline and neatly combed dark hair. "My name is Sebastian Moran." Holmes's expression remained impassive, but inwardly his mind raced. Colonel Sebastian Moran, the late Professor Moriarty's second-in-command. "I see," Holmes murmured. "And to what do I owe the pleasure of this encounter?" Moran's eyes gleamed. "A message, Mr. Holmes. A message from the past." He reached into his coat and withdrew a small folded letter. With a deliberate motion, he placed it on the seat between them. Holmes studied it for a moment before picking it up. The paper was old, but the seal, an ornate M pressed into deep red wax, was unmistakable. Moriarty! Holmes broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was precise, methodical, and utterly familiar. Holmes, if you are reading this, then my calculations were correct. Even in death, the game continues. You have always been predictable, my dear detective, but tell me, can you solve a puzzle whose pieces have been scattered beyond your reach? London is merely the beginning. By the time you realize the full extent of my design, the first act will have already concluded. But do not despair. There is still time to play your part. Consider this my final challenge to you, Holmes. The last letter of Moriarty. Until we meet again. There was no signature. There didn't need to be. Holmes let the letter rest in his lap, his sharp mind already dissecting every word, every nuance. Moran leaned back, watching him carefully. Moriarty anticipated many things, Mr. Holmes, including his own downfall, but he also planned for what would come after. You and I, we are merely the last players on a board set long ago. Holmes smiled faintly. You assume that I am playing by his rules, Colonel? Moran chuckled. We shall see. At that moment, the carriage slowed and the driver rapped twice against the wooden frame. Ugh, Moran said smoothly. It seems your associates have arrived. Ugh. Holmes tucked the letter into his coat just as the carriage door opened, revealing me and Wetherell, both breathless from the hurried journey. Holmes! I exclaimed, my relief evident. Are you all right? Quite, Watson, he said with a small smile. And as you can see, our host has been most accommodating. I turned my gaze to the man sitting opposite him, Colonel Moran. A shiver ran down my spine. Holmes gestured toward him. Allow me to introduce an old acquaintance, one who brings us tidings from beyond the grave. Moran tipped his hat toward me. Dr. Watson, Mr. Wetherell, a pleasure. Holmes's gaze darkened ever so slightly. And now, Moran, I believe you owe us an explanation. The Colonel's smile did not falter. Oh, Holmes, he said softly, the explanation is already unfolding, and I assure you, it will be one you never forget. And with that, the carriage door swung shut, carrying us deeper into the web of Moriarty's final game. The map of shadows. The carriage rattled through the fog-laden streets of London, its wheels striking the cobblestones in a steady rhythm. Inside, the tension was thick, each man seated within the confined space, acutely aware that the stakes had changed. Colonel Sebastian Moran sat with the ease of a man who held all the cards, his sharp gaze darting between us, enjoying the power he wielded. Holmes, however, remained impassive, his fingers steepled before him, his eyes half-lidded in thought. I knew better than to assume he was passive. No, he was watching, calculating, peeling back the layers of whatever game Moriarty had left behind. Wetherell, on the other hand, was visibly unsettled. His eyes flicked nervously toward Moran, then to Holmes, as though hoping for some reassurance. Holmes finally spoke. You say this letter is Moriarty's last challenge to me, Colonel. But a challenge requires a proper opponent, and you, I presume, are merely the messenger. Moran smirked, leaning back against the carriage wall. Messenger, yes, but do not mistake me for a mere errand boy, Holmes. My role in this game is far more intricate. Holmes's lips curled into the faintest hint of a smile. And yet you sit before me offering cryptic remarks instead of taking decisive action. If Moriarty's game is truly unfolding, then you are already behind. Moran's eyes flickered with something I could only describe as amusement-laced, with irritation. He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded sheet of parchment, tossing it onto Holmes's lap. "There," he said, "consider this my first move." Holmes unfolded the paper and studied it intently. I leaned closer and saw that it was a crude, hastily drawn map of London, marked with several points of interest. A thick black line ran through the city, snaking its way from the docks to the outskirts of Westminster. Along the route were 4 red X's, each accompanied by a time written in Moriarty's precise handwriting. Holmes's fingers traced the inked path as he murmured to himself, "Fascinating." I glanced at the map. "What does it mean, Holmes?" Moran chuckled. "That, Doctor, is the question of the hour." Holmes ignored him, his mind working at a speed I could scarcely follow. He tapped one of the red X's. "This mark corresponds to Charing Cross. The time beside it, 2 nights ago at precisely midnight." He tapped another near the docks. "And this one, last night." My stomach tightened. These are dates, then. Times when something occurred. Holmes nodded, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Indeed, Watson. And if we assume the pattern continues—" He ran his finger further along the path and pointed to the last mark. "Then the final event is set for tomorrow evening." Moran's smirk widened. "And there you have it. The game is set, the pieces arranged, but can you decipher the purpose before it is too late?" Holmes exhaled through his nose, his expression unreadable. Then, with deliberate precision, he folded the map and placed it inside his coat. "You will take us to the next location immediately," he ordered. Moran raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and if I refuse?" Holmes' gaze turned ice-cold. "Then I shall be forced to make you." There was a long silence, the only sound the rhythmic clatter of the carriage wheels. Then Moran laughed, a slow, knowing chuckle. "Very well, Holmes," he said, rapping twice on the carriage wall. The driver obeyed without hesitation, redirecting the horses. As we veered onto a darker, more desolate path, a chill ran down my spine. Whatever lay ahead, I had the distinct feeling we were walking willingly into the Lion's Den. The house on Blackwood Lane. The carriage rattled through the quiet streets, each turn taking us deeper into the less frequented quarters of London. The fog hung thick, muffling the sound of hooves against cobblestones. I kept my hand close to my revolver, though I suspected Holmes had already calculated 3 ways to disarm Moran should the need arise. Moran sat opposite us, his expression unreadable, his fingers idly drumming against the seat. He had the air of a man who believed himself in control, but I knew Holmes well enough to recognize that he had already begun to unravel the game before us. At last, the carriage slowed to a stop. Holmes peered out of the small window, his sharp gaze sweeping the scene before him. "We have arrived," Moran announced. Holmes did not move immediately. "Blackwood Lane," he murmured. "A curious choice. A district known for its abandoned properties and forgotten dealings. Hardly the stage for Moriarty's grand finale, unless—" His voice trailed off, and without another word, he opened the carriage door and stepped out. I followed, my senses immediately sharpened by the eerie stillness of our surroundings. Before us stood a tall, decrepit house, its once grand facade now marred by time and neglect. The windows were dark, their glass either broken or covered in grime. A single lantern flickered weakly beside the door, casting long shadows across the entrance. Holmes inhaled deeply. Curious. I frowned. What is? Do you not smell it, Watson? I took a cautious breath and caught the faintest hint of something acrid in the air. Chemicals, perhaps, or burning oil. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Moran stepped past us and ascended the short staircase to the entrance. Gentlemen, shall we? Holmes exchanged a glance with me before following. I tightened my grip on my revolver and brought up the rear. Moran produced a key and slid it into the lock with practised ease. The door groaned open, revealing a darkened hallway. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of dust and something else, something metallic. Holmes took the lead, his steps deliberate as he moved through the corridor. The floorboards creaked beneath our weight, shadows danced along the peeling wallpaper, and I had the distinct impression that we were being watched. Moran led us through a door at the end of the hallway, revealing a dimly lit room cluttered with old furniture and scattered papers. A large wooden table stood at the centre, covered with documents and maps, many of them marked in the same style as the one we had seen in the carriage. Holmes wasted no time. He strode forward, scanning the table with keen interest. His fingers danced over the documents, his mind absorbing details at a speed I could barely comprehend. "Interesting," he murmured. "Very interesting." I peered over his shoulder. "What have you found?" Holmes tapped a single piece of parchment. "This," he said, "a ledger." I frowned. "A financial record?" "Not quite," Holmes replied. "This is a record of shipments, movements of goods between various locations across London." His eyes narrowed. "And look here, dates that correspond with those on the map." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Holmes, what does it mean?" Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned his gaze to Moran. "I suspect our friend already knows." Moran smirked. "You're as sharp as ever, Holmes. But tell me, do you see the full picture yet?" Holmes studied him for a moment, then turned back to the table. He reached down and flipped over another sheet of paper. His eyes flickered with recognition. "A shipment scheduled for tomorrow night," he murmured. "Dockside. A final exchange." Moran folded his arms. "And now you see it, don't you?" Holmes was silent for a moment before he straightened. "Yes, I see it now." I looked between them. Would someone care to explain? Holmes turned to me, his expression grave. "Watson, I believe we are on the precipice of uncovering Moriarty's final act. And if I am correct, tomorrow night, the true game begins." The silent exchange. The room inside the abandoned house on Blackwood Lane had become a battlefield of intellect. Each move and counter-move a silent clash between Holmes and Moran. The ledger before us, filled with coded shipments and carefully arranged times, was no mere record of trade. It was the blueprint of Moriarty's last game. Holmes ran his fingers across the inked pages, his keen eyes absorbing details at a pace that left me struggling to keep up. The names meant little to me, but the sheer volume of transactions suggested something vast and carefully coordinated. Holmes exhaled slowly. So, this is it. Moriarty's final arrangement. Moran leaned against the table, watching Holmes with something bordering on admiration. A masterpiece, wouldn't you say? Holmes ignored the bait. You provided this ledger too easily, Colonel, which means you expect me to see something specific within it, something that benefits you. Moran chuckled. You wound me, Holmes. I simply wish to honour my late professor's wishes. Holmes remained unreadable, but I saw his fingers tense slightly against the table. Very well. Let us assume, for a moment, that I am meant to follow these clues. What awaits me at the final destination tomorrow night? Moran's smirk widened. Ah, but that would ruin the surprise. Holmes turned to me. Watson, take note of this entry. He tapped a particular listing in the ledger. March 4th, Dockside, Warehouse 17, midnight. I scribbled the details quickly. You believe this is where the final piece of the puzzle lies? Holmes nodded. Yes, but it is not simply about what will be there. It is about who will be waiting. He turned back to Moran. You would not have led me here if you did not want me to attend. Moran's expression shifted, though only slightly. You do have a way of cutting through pleasantries, Holmes. He straightened and adjusted his coat. Tomorrow night, the game ends. Whether you win or lose depends on how well you've played. Holmes watched him carefully. You speak as though you are no longer a player. Moran's smile did not reach his eyes. Oh, I am merely a spectator now, a man fulfilling his obligations. Holmes stepped toward him, lowering his voice to a near whisper. You fear something. For the first time that night, I saw a flicker of something in Moran's expression. Hesitation, perhaps even unease. But it was gone in an instant. You see too much, Holmes, Moran muttered. I only hope, for your sake, that you see enough. With that, he turned and strode toward the door. The heavy wood creaked as he pulled it open, the damp London air rushing into the room. Until tomorrow, he called over his shoulder, before disappearing into the night. I exhaled slowly, my hand still hovering near my revolver. Holmes, I do not like this. Holmes was silent for a moment, staring at the door where Moran had just stood. Then, with swift precision, he gathered the ledger, the map, and several other documents from the table. No, Watson, he said finally, neither do I. He turned to me, his gaze sharp with resolve. Come, we have much to prepare. And with that, we stepped out into the fog, knowing that the final act was upon us. To be continued. The shadow at the docks. The evening air was thick with the scent of salt and smoke as we made our way toward the dockyards. The gas lamps lining the waterfront flickered weakly against the encroaching mist, their glow barely illuminating the vast hulking shapes of moored ships. The Thames, dark and sluggish, lapped against the wooden piers, its surface broken only by the occasional ripple of a passing barge. Holmes walked ahead with purpose, his sharp eyes sweeping the docks with the precision of a man who had already deduced half the mystery before it had fully revealed itself. I kept pace beside him, my revolver tucked discreetly into my coat pocket, my senses alert for any sign of danger. Warehouse 17, I murmured, glancing at the numbers painted on the buildings lining the waterfront. Holmes nodded. "It is just ahead." The structure loomed before us, its wooden walls weathered and blackened with age. A faint glow emanated from within, casting long shadows through the cracks in the heavy doors. From somewhere inside, the muffled sound of movement reached our ears. A low shuffling, the occasional scrape of a boot against the floor. Holmes raised a hand, signalling for silence. He pressed himself against the wall, listening intently. I followed suit, my breath held as we strained to catch the sounds within. Then Holmes moved. With a deftness that belied the tension in the air, he reached for the latch and, with the lightest push, eased the door open just enough for us to slip inside. The warehouse was cavernous, the ceiling lost in shadow. Crates and barrels were stacked high against the walls, forming a labyrinth of narrow corridors. Lanterns hung from rusted hooks, their feeble light casting flickering shapes across the floor. Holmes crouched low, his eyes darting across the scene. I followed his gaze and saw them, figures moving in the dim light, their forms shifting between the crates. There were at least 4 of them. At the centre of it all stood a tall man in a long coat, his hands clasped behind his back. He did not move like a common dockworker or a hired thug. There was a refinement to him, a sense of control. Holmes inhaled sharply. "So, the final piece is in place," he whispered. I turned to him. "Who is he?" Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he straightened slightly, his expression unreadable. "Let us see if he wishes to introduce himself." Before I could object, Holmes stepped forward into the dim glow of the lanterns, his presence immediately noticed by the figures before us. The tall man turned slowly, and as the light fell upon his face, I felt a jolt of recognition. It was not Colonel Moran. It was someone far worse. The man smiled, a slow, knowing smile that sent a chill through my bones. "Ah, Mr. Holmes, I was wondering when you would arrive." Holmes inclined his head. I must admit, you have maintained a rather impressive illusion of absence." The man chuckled. Moriarty was not the only one with a mind for the long game. I gripped my revolver. "Holmes, who is this man?" Holmes's voice was quiet, but edged with steel. "Professor Moriarty's true successor." The man spread his arms. "And now, Mr. Holmes, we conclude our business." The lanterns flickered, shadows moved, and the trap was sprung. The successor's gambit. The moment the words left Holmes's lips, a cold realization settled over me. The true mastermind, the one who had orchestrated every step of this elaborate puzzle, had just stepped from the shadows. The man before us, tall and composed, radiated a quiet menace. His dark eyes held none of Moriarty's outward charm, but there was something worse in them. Patience, a predator's patience. "I see my reputation precedes me," he said, his voice smooth, deliberate. "And yet I remain a mystery even to you, Mr. Holmes." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Not entirely." The successor tilted his head slightly. "Oh?" Holmes stepped forward, his keen gaze dissecting the man as if peeling back layers of an intricate puzzle. "Your presence alone answers more questions than you realize. You are not merely some understudy of Moriarty's. No, you have been waiting." While the world believed his empire had crumbled, you ensured its survival, working in the shadows, shaping its next incarnation. The man's smile did not fade. Very good. Continue. Holmes did not hesitate. You allowed Moran to act as a distraction, leading me through a carefully placed sequence of events. Each clue, each turn in this game was meant to appear as though it was leading to Moriarty's final move. In reality, you were conditioning me, preparing me to believe I was one step ahead, when, in truth, I have been exactly where you needed me to be. I felt my grip tighten around my revolver. Holmes, what are you saying? Holmes exhaled sharply. Watson, this was never about unravelling Moriarty's last plot. It was about ensuring I would arrive here tonight. The man clapped his hands once, slowly. A brilliant mind indeed, and yet even brilliance cannot escape inevitability. A faint sound echoed from above, the rustling of fabric, the subtle creak of wood. My instinct screamed warning. Holmes's lips barely moved. Watson, now! Before I could think, before the shadows above could descend, Holmes grabbed the nearest lantern and hurled it towards the stacked crates. The flame burst against dry wood, igniting instantly. In the same breath, Holmes wrenched me backward as gunfire erupted, bullets splintering the ground where we had stood moments before. Shouts rang through the warehouse as the successor's men scrambled, momentarily blinded by the sudden blaze. Holmes wasted no time, his hand clamping around my arm as he pulled me toward the exit. This way, Watson! I barely had time to register the chaos unfolding behind us. The successor's voice barking orders, the fire crackling as it hungrily devoured the stacked shipments. Before we were through the warehouse doors and into the cold night air, Holmes did not slow. He dragged me into the nearest alleyway, pressing us against the damp brick wall as a fresh volley of gunshots rattled the streets. I struggled to catch my breath. Holmes, who is he? Holmes's eyes flickered with something rare, an acknowledgement of danger beyond even his calculations. He is a man who studied Moriarty's mistakes. And unlike Moriarty, he exhaled, he will not underestimate us again. From the docks, the flames of the burning warehouse cast long shadows over the water. The final move had begun. Checkmate! The fire raged behind us, turning the night sky into a tapestry of flickering orange and black. Shouts echoed through the dockyards, men scrambling, orders shouted, chaos unfolding as the flames devoured the remnants of Moriarty's last grand scheme. But Holmes was already in motion, his mind working at a speed I could barely follow. He gripped my shoulder. Watson, we must move swiftly. The successor is no fool. He anticipated every step until now. We must ensure this is where his plan unravels. We darted through the alleyways, the sound of boots hammering against the cobblestones behind us. Holmes led us not away from the docks, but deeper into them, toward a waiting carriage hidden in the shadows. A figure stepped from the driver's seat, lifting his lantern. Inspector Lestrade. Holmes! He barked. What in blazes is happening? Holmes wasted no time. The successor is here. He believes he has outmaneuvered us, but we have one advantage left. Lestrade frowned. And that would be... Holmes smiled faintly. He does not know that I allowed him to chase me. The inspector barely had time to react before Holmes was inside the carriage, motioning for us to follow. "Watson, in, quickly!" I climbed in, and Lestrade snapped at his driver to start moving. The carriage jolted forward just as gunfire cracked through the night, bullets striking the cobblestones where we had stood moments before. Lestrade cursed. "Who in the devil is this successor?" Holmes adjusted his cuffs, remarkably calm. A man who believes he has inherited Moriarty's throne, but unlike the Professor, he lacks the one quality necessary to truly rival me. Lestrade shot him a sharp look. "And what is that?" Holmes smirked. "Patience." The carriage rattled through the streets of London, twisting and turning through fog-drenched roads, until finally coming to a halt before Scotland Yard. We disembarked swiftly, rushing inside as officers moved to secure the building. Inside, Holmes walked directly to Lestrade's office and spread the stolen ledger across the table. "We have him." Lestrade leaned over the documents, scanning the careful notations. "Explain." Holmes tapped a particular entry. "This ledger was never just a record of smuggling. It is a coded list of names, payments, and locations. But more than that, it is evidence. Everything ties back to the successor." I frowned. "But he is careful, Holmes. Surely he did not leave behind a trail leading directly to himself." Holmes's eyes gleamed. But that is where his arrogance betrays him. Moriarty knew the value of remaining a shadow. His successor, however, wished to prove himself superior. That desire for validation is what undoes him. He pointed to a signature at the bottom of the last page. An alias, perhaps, but one that, when cross-referenced with known criminal associates, would expose the successor's identity. Lestrade's eyes widened. "Good Lord! This is enough to issue a warrant." Holmes nodded. "Precisely, but we shall not wait for him to come to us." Within the hour, a team of Scotland Yard officers moved in silence through the city, Holmes and I among them. We approached a grand townhouse in Kensington, its gas lamps burning low. Holmes signalled for silence as Lestrade's men took their positions. Then Holmes knocked. There was a pause, then slow, deliberate footsteps approached. The door creaked open, revealing the successor himself, dressed impeccably as if he had not just ordered our deaths hours before. He smirked. "Ah, Mr. Holmes, I was expecting you." Holmes inclined his head. "I rather doubt that." Before the man could move, Lestrade stepped forward. "You are under arrest for conspiracy, murder, and criminal enterprise." The successor's smirk faltered. "On what grounds?" Holmes reached into his coat and withdrew the ledger. "Your own arrogance signed your fate." For the first time, true anger flickered across the successor's face. He inhaled sharply, as if considering his next move, fight or flight. But the street behind us was lined with Scotland Yard's finest, and escape was impossible. Holmes studied him with quiet satisfaction. "Your game is over." The successor's lips pressed into a thin line. Then, in a low voice, he muttered, "For now." Lestrade's men moved in, restraining him as the final pieces of the criminal empire Moriarty had built came crashing down. As the successor was led away into the foggy night, I turned to Holmes. "Do you think we have truly seen the last of him?" Holmes exhaled, slipping his hands into his pockets. "Watson, Crime is much like the tide. It recedes, only to return in another form. But for tonight at least, London is rid of another shadow. I nodded, watching as the mist swallowed the retreating figures of Lestrade's men. Holmes stretched slightly and smirked. "And now, Watson, I believe I shall require a hot cup of tea. Come along." With that, we turned back toward Baker Street, leaving the dark games of the underworld behind, at least until the next case arrived at our door.